you ever watched a film and thought, that's not what I'd do, particularly in a thriller or a horror movie? You know, when the main character goes downstairs to investigate the strange noise and you totally think that they should have been calling the police instead? Then you should try Erica, a 2019 full-motion video interactive film video game, which is a hell of a mouthful that basically means you choose the actions in a film. Remember Bandersnatch, Netflix film that wasn't a film, which received mixed reviews? Erica is kind of like that, but without the guy from We're the Millers and Little Hope. Scroll down the blog, by the way, to see my review of that one. In Erica, you play as the titular girl who wakes up one morning to a rather unusual package on her doorstep. The gruesome discovery pulls her back into the trauma of her father's death when she was a child and slowly uncovers a strange story steeped in Greek mythology. It's a classic story trope, but Erica does it in an interesting way with some twists and turns that make this a thriller to be remembered. The casting choice for Erica is interesting, as they've chosen a woman who looks slightly like an animated character. Holly Earl has large, wide eyes and a small face which lean towards the animated style, and it's a great complementing feature to the game. The supporting cast are pretty great too. I was very happy to see Terence Maynard, who plays Lucian, as he was Van Helsing in a CBBC series called Young Dracula that I was obsessed with when I was 9 years old. By filming real people, there is none of those awkward moments we usually get in games when fabric passes through objects or facial expressions do not make sense. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Mass Effect Andromeda. Throughout the game, you make choices regarding dialogue and movement which ultimately decide your fate. Some choices can have dramatic impacts, including life or death moments towards the end. You also control some of the more mundane of Eric's actions, such as flicking on a lighter or pulling out drawers whilst you investigate. This is where the game starts to weaken for me, as you border on David Cage-like realism, but without the fluidity of motion his later games like Detroit Become Human offered. In Erica, unless you make a slow, smooth motion using the touchpad, the action on screen is sticky and ultimately breaks from the immersion of using real actors. Whilst you can choose to play the game using your PS4 controller, it's recommended you download an app onto your phone and use this to make the gameplay more seamless. I'm not really sure why Flavorworks chose to do this. I get that it makes the game more playable for people who don't game too much, but given it's only available on PS4, it's unlikely you'll be a novice when you pick it up. And even then, it's hard to get a smooth motion for actions, particularly pulling something towards you like a box. As I mentioned before, there are older games that make use of the DualShock touchpad effectively, so the whole thing just seems like a lot of work for nothing. If you make a game solely for PlayStation, use the PlayStation, you know? Another minor complaint is that choices didn't always make sense. Now, this is a bit of an issue for all choice-based games. Even as far back as Telltale stuff, when you only have so much time to make a decision, the devs have to try and quickly define what each option will cause. This is sometimes quite difficult to do, particularly in complex situations, and so you end up not getting what you thought you would. Erica often tries to simplify down to a single word option, but there is no way of knowing what that will actually make happen. But before we move on to the spoiler bit, I am going to end on a positive and say that the soundtrack is excellent. This shouldn't be a surprise given it was composed by Austin Wintory, as in the only guy to be nominated for a Grammy for a video game score with Journey. Yeah, that guy. His rap sheet also includes Flow, The Banner Saga, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and most recently The Pathless, which I'm hoping to actually review fairly soon. But back to Erica, the soundtrack all stems from a fictitious opera piece Erica is played as a child, and Wintory cleverly uses that motif throughout the game. It reminds the player that the past is always close at hand in a really subtle way. Now on to the spoiler bit, so look away if you desperately don't want the ending ruined. Oh god, where to even begin? The ending for me was a little bit of a letdown, although isn't that usually the way with thrillers? You know, the big reveal is kind of a bummer because it deflates the intrigue you've been building throughout. Erica struggles with this, as it kind of feels like they weren't sure whether to make it all real, so decided to leave you to decide, but also didn't give you enough resources to make that decision. The whole everyone's in on it surprise is a little cliche for my taste, and also kind of confusing, because there was never a point when any of them actually revealed working together. Instead, they continue to deny all wrongdoing so that you can have that maybe it's all in your head thought process too. Finally, there are so many unanswered questions at the end that kind of cheapen the experience, which would have been really good. The climactic sequence involves you going back to Delphi House to rescue your mother and stop the cult misusing women. Except your mother is just never found or really mentioned again, and you end up not knowing if she was dead to begin with. To top that all off, was Mia even real? She just says she can't go on, you leave her, and she's never seen again.
I'd have liked at least some of it to be concrete, you know? All in all, Erica is an awesome attempt at an FMV game, but the openness of the narrative kind of spoils the overall experience, especially when paired with dodgy controls that drop the immersion. However, I thoroughly enjoyed my playthrough and think its short length makes it perfect for a group game night.